So like most.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our insurance webinar tonight. So this is going to be insurance webinar products and how to prep your facility. And we're hosted by the New York City Committee of CANI. Welcome, everybody. So we're going to do some introductions. And we're going to start with Derek. This is Derek Davis. He's from McNeil and Company. And you could just speak about yourself and your company.
Well, that's still a very large picture, by the way. So I'm trying to. Derek Davis, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at McNeil and Company. We are what the insurance space deems a managing general underwriter. It's a fancy way of saying that we create and manage products for misunderstood industries. So as it pertains to cannabis, it's really twofold. One, we created a workers' compensation safety group with CANI. And that's up and running. We have customers or clients that are our CANI members. And then two, a CANI-based insurance company, or reciprocal. You'll hear those words thrown out, which isn't done. It's been formed. It's sitting on the governor's desk and with the Department of Financial Services. But that'll be a property casualty insurance company for adult use license holders and CANI members as well.
Okay. Moving on to Eric Schneider, Managing Director of Alpha Root and co-founder.
No, we really appreciate you having us on here, Vanessa. So my name is Eric Schneider, one of the co-founders of Alpha Root. We are a retail commercial insurance brokerage that focuses exclusively in the cannabis space. We've been really working in the industry since 2012 when Colorado went rec. And myself and my partner, Isaac Bach, built the Alpha Root brand, truthfully starting in 2017. And then, we work with companies, all shapes and sizes across the entire supply chain, from early stage applicants, maybe procuring their first license, all the way up to some of the larger multi-state operators in the space, and everything in between. And we focus on primarily property and casualty insurance. So things like general liability, workers' comp, property insurance, directors and officers, so on and so forth. And here to be a resource and help out anybody in the industry.
Right. Kent Doctor, and he's from Reagan Insurance.
Hi, thanks for having me. Kent Doctor here. We're based out of, I work for Reagan Companies. We're based out of Syracuse, New York. We are basically a full service agency. It was my idea to get into the cannabis space. Looked like something that we could be good at. I have a background that really drives to the main tenets of the cannabis industry. Really good with manufacturers, really good with security and safety. And they always say that you should write what you know. So this is something that's right in my wheelhouse. I do have a business partner, Josh Amadon. He couldn't join me tonight, but he also supports this space, and we're really looking to help you guys out.
Okay. And last but not least, Mauricio Comey from Dutchy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining, and thank you for inviting us. So my name is Mauricio Comey. I am the CEO of Dutchy Insurance, which is a subsidiary of Dutchy, a vertical software as a service provider specific for the cannabis space. You might have seen our point of sale system and our e-commerce solution as the market leading solutions for dispensaries in particular to operate their businesses. And as part of that, we are also helping cannabis businesses with some embedded financial services, particularly payments and insurance as well. My background is mostly on the technology side, where I have been doing embedded financial services for the last 15 years, and here to be a resource as well to everyone as you guys are looking to protect your business, making sure that the right insurance needs are met, given how much more complex it is in cannabis versus any other industry.
All right, so now these are some of the questions that we've curated from the attendees that are on tonight, as well as some additional questions in general about cannabis insurance. So what I'm taking, I listed all the questions in here, and the way that we kind of probably operate is whenever you guys feel like chiming in, and someone can take the lead and start it, and then, and we can have you guys comments based on, if you have an answer and things like that. So first things first, why do we need cannabis insurance? Anybody want to take that?
I could kick things off.
Sure.
No, I mean, look, like aside from cannabis, right? When you look at any sort of industry or business in general, right? Insurance is a key part of just risk management. I think, insurance, other things like outside of insurance, you look at banking, other sort of, additional framework that surrounds the industry that's really important for it to scale, right? Obviously when it was, non-licensed operators, you can't get insurance, right? And I think it shows the trajectory of the industry becoming more legitimate as we continue to, evolve and more states come online. There's more insurance companies starting to come into the market as well, right? I think outside of just being a cannabis operator, I think insurance is really important for any business, and especially in, really high risk, highly regulated industries. You look at, I would say things like, cannabis, crypto, where claims can really, curtail business operations and potentially put someone out of business. I think it's really important to have a backstop in order to make sure that you guys are scaling in a proper fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And I would add to that, which is completely agree. But on top of that, there's also in making sure that you're meeting at the most basic level government obligations as well as contractual obligations. So here it is important if you want to run a business compliantly, limiting the amount of risk that you're exposing yourself to. The bare minimum is meet what the government requires. Also look at your contract. Sometimes those will have insurance requirements that are important to take into consideration. And if you don't have those insurance needs met, then you're potentially in breach of contract, which can put you in trouble if a situation were to arise.
Yeah. And just note for some people who are new to even opening businesses, and I think that there are a lot of new entrepreneurs in this space, especially card applicants and everything, you are required for workers' compensation. So those are definitely like at least bare minimum you need to cover your employees. That is in the regulations and by law. So just, I know a lot of people are coming in and they have no idea. So you do need to cover that. You do typically need general liability. That's always a key factor as well. So what is the difference between regular workers' compensation and cannabis specific workers' compensation? Is there a difference? Or
I can take that one. No, I mean, outside of the fact that you're dealing with cannabis, there's no difference in what you're doing. So workers' compensation, the premiums derive from what they call class codes. So I'm sure folks have heard that thrown around, which basically is assigning a rate per $100 of payroll for an individual job or what they're doing, the duties they're performing. So those class codes are the same class codes from other industries. There's not cannabis specific class codes. So when somebody's talking, there's nothing different between any other industry and cannabis. The way it functions is the same.
Yeah, I'd like to add that, I mean, the big difference is going to be your access. You can't obtain workers' comp from your traditional lines of insurance. You're going to need to look for some kind of a specialized carrier. That's going to be your main difference right there.
Okay. And is it smart to have insurance if you're doing workers' comp from one product? Is it better to have all the products, all the insurance products under one company, or using different companies for different products?
Yeah, you can use different companies for different products. I think there is important for you to work with your agent to create the right package that protects your business. Some carriers will have some advantages in making sure that if there's 2 or 3 products, that there's like no overlap or any particular gaps. But that's something that an agent can work with you to make sure that it's done appropriately. And sometimes a carrier will provide workers' comp and not the rest, and that might be their specialty. So you might want to keep them separate for those reasons.
It certainly can cause some confusion for the insured, and you definitely want to eliminate confusion, certainly for people new to business. And then you also talked about the coverages and any gaps in coverage. And you also have to think about an umbrella, which is something that people might want to think about. And some umbrellas might only go over certain policies. So you want to make sure that if you're going to have an umbrella, that's going to actually cover everything that you have.
Right. Average cost for cannabis insurance annually. So I guess that based on different products, so I which is totally understandable. So I guess what, how is it calculated? Is it based on volume? Is it based on number of employees? So that, yeah.
It varies by, oh, sorry, Eric, go ahead.
No,
No,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say it is very much, it depends, right? You know, you can have a dispensary, right? If you look at one single location dispensary like Planet 13 Superstore in Las Vegas versus something that's, 1,000 square feet, a family-owned business, very different from a premium perspective and what their needs are. But at the end of the day, it's still a single dispensary license, right? And typically like premiums are always going to be dictated by a specific rating basis. So for product liability, typically it's going to be revenue based. For general liability, it's going to be either square footage or also revenue. For things like directors and officers insurance and more sophisticated products, it's going to be, how much capital have you raised, right? So there's a lot of, it depends, unfortunately. And I think that's what's really important is, what we try to do is take each individual business as its own and really try to curate a program that meets that specific needs, right? Because not one organization is going to be the same as the other dispensary. So it's just really important. But there are ways, in speaking with like your agent to benchmark, and if you came to us and said, hey, I'm looking to open up a dispensary doing, 3 million in revenue, we need XYZ coverages, we could probably give you a good idea, which I think is important for when you guys are looking at your financial models and looking at, your cost of goods sold and expenses. But at the end of the day, it's important to actually get the physical quote in hand, what really says what the end premium is.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to think about, like, you're starting your business from scratch, like what do you need to get up and running? And from there, maybe you start with something that is a little bit more compressed, limited and narrow. It helps also with cash flow. But it is important that as your business evolves and grows, that your insurance keeps up to date. So something that often happens is if you're growing very rapidly and your insurance was priced at a certain amount, and now you're here, the premium will go, will grow not just for future years, but also for the years past. So I think the partnership with your broker here is super important to make sure that you're paying the right amount, also that you have some degree of predictability as those prices might increase. And if you're changing your business, if you're increasing the complexity of your operation, that you keep up to date. If you're just a dispensary doing retail, it's one thing. If you start doing delivery, that's a different thing. If you start integrating vertically and doing cultivation and processing, it's different. So each business will have different needs.
Two things to add on that quickly, and everybody said it, but one, and probably most importantly, is to align yourself with an insurance agency that knows what they're talking about. Because if you don't, you could be in a pretty bad situation with exclusionary language for cannabis or THC. So if you have an agency that has dedicated resources to the space or has existing customers, it's going to give you a leg up because they're going to be able to know what's available in the market and be a true resource for you. The second part to cost is just a piece of the puzzle, in that, the total cost of insurance, you got to take into consideration if there's like a deductible or a retention, what type of insurance you have. If there's exclusionary language, it's not going to be, you can't use it for the type of operation you're running. There's a lot of pieces there that all point back to making sure that you have an insurance professional that knows what they're talking about. So you're buying a product that fits your business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the worst that can happen is that you buy and pay for something that doesn't cover you.
So yeah. I've seen that, and I'm sure these guys
That
have
is
seen it
definitely
too.
a waste of money.
Yeah. And we'll get back to that later because I would really like to talk and dive deep into, how that, I guess, people, especially like I'd say in the retail space, since that is a focus as people are building out their facilities now, like how they can prevent and ensure that they're using the correct materials and all that stuff to ensure that there's like minimal loss prevention and maximize the loss prevention. So if their claim is, it's like, well, the insurance company said hardware wasn't up to snuff and we're not gonna honor your claim. things like that, but we'll get back to that. We did pull a little bit about some of the more general products that are out there for cannabis that are associated with cannabis that you may or may not need to get. And I wanted to see if you guys could just briefly explain some of these products and are they necessary? Obviously, it's relative to what kind of, a crop insurance, you're not going to need that as a retailer, but as a cultivator, is that something that they should be looking for? So we can start off with commercial general liability. Someone can take that.
Does each person want to just take two and we'll kind of go down
Yeah,
the line?
let's do that. Yeah. So Eric, you can start off with the first two. How's that?
So commercial general liability, your classic slip and fall claims, right? So if you have a premises where you're either selling product or have a physical location, this is going to be really important. Mauricio was talking about, contractual requirements. Almost every single contract that clients enter into, even if it's applicable or not, a lot of times attorneys just think they know insurance and not really, and they just always put in commercial general liability is always going to be in the insurance requirements pretty much every time. Unless you're like a technology provider, it may not be in there, but your classic slip and fall claims, commercial general liability, as I mentioned previously, can be rated off of square footage or, typically revenue. And the exposure also depends on amount of foot traffic a lot of times, right? So, general liability is going to be more important for a dispensary because it's for third party bodily injury and property damage, right? I think it's important to make that distinction because if you have an employee that slips and falls on your premises, that's a workers' comp claim, right? So this is for third party bodily injury or property damage as a result of the premises that at the location. Cultivation, important as well, but you don't really have a lot of outside third parties as much as you do at the dispensary level. And then product liability insurance, a lot of times what we'll see is general liability and product liability are honestly like packaged on the same policy. So you'll see a general liability policy, and then you'll see a subsection that says products and completed operations, synonymous with product liability. Very, very seldom will you see standalone product liability unless it's for like a very large company with a big vape exposure. Maybe they split out and just get product liability for that on a standalone basis. But typically it's going to be packaged with general liability. And then going back to third party bodily injury or property damage as a result of your products or completed operations. So the products that you're selling, somebody has a bad experience, right? Makes a claim. And I think what's also important about product liability, just to wrap it up, is that even if you're a dispensary and you're not making the actual product, you're just the retail location that's selling it, likely in the event of a claim, the entire supply chain is going to get brought into the claim. What happens on the back end is what's called like carrier subrogation. And then the insurance companies say, wait, it's actually the cultivator fault or the manufacturer's fault. But if you're brought into the claim as a retailer and you don't have general liability with product liability, you're going to be out of pocket with a lot of defense costs and things like that. So I think that's a big misconception sometimes is like retailers say, well, I don't need product liability because it's not my product, I'm just reselling it. But just typically the way claims work is that mostly everybody in the supply chain gets brought in.
And maybe to highlight, even in that particular case, sometimes the dispensaries do manipulate the product. So if the issue was because of the way it was stored or because of the way it was handled, then the fault will actually be on your side. And then as you look at those packaged products, it's important to call out something as simple as sometimes it's just like a product recall that helps you with the recall of those things, of those products if there's an issue. But maybe there is like health hazard exclusions, right? So if there's like an actual physical impact that happens to somebody, those claims won't be paid out. So I think here is going to be very important to go through the fine print of these particular products, especially in cannabis, because a lot of the things that you might expect in other industries to be protected here, often in cannabis, they're not. So there is where that advisory from your broker is going to be super important to get right.
Yeah. And also just in general, commercial general liability may be also even required in most cases for contract leases and stuff like that. So the landlord will require you to have them named as a additional insured. So that's also to keep in mind when you're negotiating leases, that you may have to have that and supply that to them and when you sign the lease.
The one other thing to add on product liability to add on to Mao's comment is that there's also a lot unknown right now in the industry as it pertains to product liability. And you might be a dispensary that isn't adjusting anything. You're just selling a processor's product. And if something was to happen and it starts working its way through the courts, you could be held strictly liable for selling that product. So given the unknown, that's another reason to buy that coverage as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on to commercial property insurance and crop insurance. Derek, you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah. So commercial property is pretty straightforward. You're insuring your building and your contents. So depending on what your operation looks like, it's going to be the building itself. There'll be questions around how it's made, what type of construction type it is. You'll have a lot of those questions from your agent, and the insurance company will use that to come up with an insurance rate for you. And then we could explain it very simplistically. If you were going to take the building, turn it upside down, and everything that fell out, that would be your contents. So you're looking at both of those and insuring them. And then crop insurance obviously would be for the cultivation side of things, is insuring the crop itself. This tends to be very the insurance industry calls peril. So it'll be from fire and other perils like that could cause damage to your crop, where you would be reimbursed for the damage to your crop.
All right, thanks. And Kent's directors and
I
did you
wanted
have
to
something else? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to, like, Vanessa, you kind of hit it on, like, what protective safeguards should companies have in place? Like with property insurance, a lot of times there'll be a section that says these are the protective safeguards that you have to have in place in order to get theft coverage, right? So, I had a client where we articulated the safeguards, and they had, all their product out and weren't storing it properly overnight. They were kind of like keeping it out in the day, like avocados at Whole Foods. And of course they were a target and, had a break-in, right? So I think being really prudent and not using insurance as a crutch, but knowing like what triggers coverage and where you could be denied if you're not following the policies and procedures of the policy. So that just comes up a lot on property insurance, especially with theft, how things are stored, so on and so forth.
Are they locked? If you have jewelry out, it's like, and you don't lock it and then someone
safe.
steals it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I would add to that it's important to think about the build out of your store, knowing insurance beforehand. We had a customer that designed their dispensary in a particular way. The way they set up their security systems and their vault and safe was in a certain way. And then when they went to buy insurance, their requirements were actually different. So if you have a quote from an insurance policy before you start your design, it can be helpful so that you make sure that you then find an insurance coverage that is actually well designed for what you're particularly building. And often people don't think about that. Insurance is often left to the very end. And then you run into problems like this ones that can cause a ton of headaches, a ton of problems once you're ready to go forward. So starting early here really matters.
Yeah. And that's really key. And I know that's why I was like, we need to get on this insurance, because people building out their spaces, they have to be aware of how they're going to be storing stuff and how they are going to be building out their space, and it meets those requirements, and so they can put in a claim and it will be fulfilled, or it will be, completed, stuff like that. So let's move on to directors and officers policies, employee protection liability insurance. Kent, do you want to take those two?
Sure. Directors and officers, simple enough. That's actually going to protect the executives, their personal assets, in case there was any type of a suit against them. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a factor as the industry starts to grow. Currently, I'm not seeing. It's a potential to be a pretty expensive policies from what I hear. But I personally have talked to many across New York State, many potential retailers, many potential companies, and it's not something that seems to come up too often right now. Anybody want to?
Yeah, I would just say, like, D&O typically comes into play when you raise outside capital. So you have a fiduciary duty to, your shareholders. And obviously, when you're raising capital, you're making certain representations as to, hey, if you invest $3 million into my organization, this is what we're going to do with it. This is the intent. But as we know, running a business, things don't always go as intended, and you could be held personally liable from shareholders. And also, too, a lot of times D&O can be really effective to attract good board members. We've seen that a lot of times too. So, strategic partners that want to come in, they want to make sure that they're personally protected as a board member of a company. So we see that often, but typically D&O is going to be important when you raise. Normally, I would say you get to that seed Series A stage, like when you do friends and family under $1 million in outside capital, not super important. And then with D&O too, there's a big distinction as a private organization versus public, because public D&O and private D&O are very different things. Because I know it's not as prudent here, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But public companies are then subjected to securities litigation, being traded on an exchange. So, and obviously, when you subject yourself to retail investors, not only private investors, right? There's just a larger exposure. So with D&O, there's a difference between private and public, but really comes into play when you're looking to, bring on outside capital or, strategic board members a lot of times.
Right. All right. And employee protection liability insurance and you can go over workers' compensation quickly. Ken.
EPLI, that is basically, that's going to cover your wrongful terminations. It's going to cover your sexual harassment claims, discrimination in the workplace. It's something that I strongly encourage every company to have. It's a huge litigation class right now. You see the claims, and it is something that can be difficult to place if you don't have the proper protections in place, employee handbooks, things like that. But it's definitely something that is going to be required. Not required from it's something that you should certainly strongly think about.
I would add that New York is one of those states where this matters more than other states. So, given that this is New York focused, again, highly encouraged given the nature of the state.
Yes, from my experience, I own a few businesses, and yes, it is definitely one of those things that in New York, a lot of people take advantage of, as and require her.
And in terms to echo what Ken said, and if you want to make yourself best in class, make sure you have those policies and procedures in place, that have policies around hiring and training employees, and that's done continuously. Because in the eyes of a carrier, when they're looking to see if you're a good risk to insure for employment practice liability, they're going to look at those things. And that's directly what they're going to underwrite to determine what you're paying, and then if it's a risk that they're willing to insure.
And then I'll just quickly go over workers' comp, Ken.
Sure, workers' comp is going to cover injuries in the workplace. I mean, it's pretty much that simple. It is a statutory coverage. It's something that is required, and so I mean, there's really no way around it. As soon as you hire your first employee, you're going to need to get workers' compensation insurance. For sure.
All right, and Mauricio, if you want to continue with cyber insurance and cargo insurance.
Yeah, sure. So on the cyber insurance front, so this is to protect you against any issues that might come from using technology. So a lot of businesses sometimes face situations like data breaches or ransomware type situations where somebody hijacks your systems and then asks for money to be able to get access to those systems again. So cyber insurance is really important. Like pretty much any business these days uses technology in one way, shape, or form. In our case, we also offer the point of sale systems and e-commerce platforms for you to interact with your customers. But if you as a business handle those systems inappropriately, then you might be exposed from a situation that might have an impact on your technology. So it's an important one to consider when you're running technology to run your business. Cargo, and I would even expand this to broader, what happens when you have things in transit, not just protecting the goods when they're moving from one place to the other, but if you have vehicles as well. And I would separate here privately owned vehicles, company owned vehicles, and the merchandise that lives in those products. So it's really important to keep in mind those situations so that you can get the right products. So, a typical example that we see sometimes, dispensary, like family owned dispensary that has employees doing deliveries with their personal vehicles. So here it's important to have hired non-owned auto insurance so that if there's a situation where there is a claim for an accident that happens in those vehicles, you should be protected for that. If the vehicles are company owned, then you should get commercial auto. And then for the merchandise that is in transit, then you should get cargo insurance.
Yeah, and just keep that in mind too, as people are preparing, because retail license are allowed to have up to 25 employees as delivery people. So that could be definitely a boon for people and going into the retail space to have a delivery, option for their store. So that could be something that, they can take advantage of, but keep in mind cargo insurance will be important if something happens on the road.
Yeah, once it's outside of your premises, then this really matters.
One thing that I was going to say too with just cargo insurance is it's more applicable for like distributors, I would say, because like what's the total insurable value that you would have at any one moment if you're doing one delivery, right? If you say to yourself, well, it's a $10,000 at any one time, or maybe even less, and there's a $5,000 deductible on the policy, is that really worth insuring that risk, right? I would say, for distributors, if you're moving $500,000 worth of goods at any one time, right, having a cargo policy is important. So just understanding, okay, how much at any one time is the maximum amount that I'm moving, and does a cargo policy make sense? Contemplate the deductible in the event of a claim.
Yeah, great. So let's move on to the retail section. We do have a lot of sections, so I might skip over some questions because we only have about 28 minutes left, and there are a few, there's like 1 or 2 questions that we're going to open up Q&A at the end. But so let's start off with, as retailers are building their stores right now, and this is a good time to talk about it. What hardware, materials, or recommendations would you suggest, or how would you suggest going about that?
Yeah, I think various different situations depending on the type of business that you are. I think the 3 main things to consider here are the vaults, for example, or like where are you storing money and product. So here is really important that the right type of storage solution is put in place according to the different carrier needs to meet those minimum requirements, and different carriers have different approaches for this. So I think it's more a conversation that you need to have with your agent as well, based on the reality of your business. The second one is access to the dispensary. So the type of doors that you use and the type of security that those doors enable, doors, windows, anything that helps, that makes it possible for somebody to go in. And then maybe the third one is security systems. So cameras, alarms, anything that might help detract somebody from essentially breaking in. Those would be the 3 that I would consider as the most important to think about and have a conversation. I don't know if you...
Do you guys also take into consideration security, like on-site security, or like a third-party contractor or something like that to be on site? Does that play into insurance? Super important.
And here, the relationship that you have with the people that are providing security is really important as well. So are they employees? Are they third-party contractors? Because that changes the way you think about the policies that you need to buy and the contractual language that you need to have in that contract. The 2 other variables that also matter is if the security guards are armed or not. Because that also changes the overall exposure that policy has. And the third one is if there's animals. We've seen cases where people have dogs as well. And if a dog bites somebody, that can be a potential lawsuit as well. So keep that in mind when you are hiring your security as well as buying your insurance policy.
Yeah, I would say don't reinvent the wheel here. I mean, there are experts out there in the field, and that's the first people I would call would be experts in cannabis security. They're going to be able to, and also experts in construction. They're going to be able to point you in the right direction to make sure that you're going to construct your facility appropriately.
Yeah, I think there's a big, we can talk about the cannabis specific stuff all day long, but at the end of the day, if you take care of the obvious stuff, to make sure there's no cracks in your sidewalk, to make sure steps are clearly marked so there isn't a slip and fall, back to the CGL coverage, to make sure that the dispensary is not in a high crime area, because when you're talking to an insurance carrier, they're going to look at that, or that there's the doors and the cameras are up to par and there's good lighting. That stuff more than anything. Like if you can take and perform well there, and then you have cannabis claims, you'll be a good insurable risk. A good operation takes care of the obvious things. So I would definitely make sure that you're not so focused on things that are so industry specific that you miss things that should be taken care of, that are obvious.
And then does that, so going back to where we were talking about having the security team take a look at your plans, at what point should the insurance take a look at your plans if you decide to go work with a broker or something, or an agency able to make sure that as you're building it out, that it is sufficient?
The first thing I would do is I would contact my insurance agent. I would ask for supplemental applications and make sure that everything that you're planning on doing is going to fit into the specifications of that supplemental application.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, and like kind of like what I said earlier, like there's literally like an endorsement on almost all of these policies. It's like protective safeguards, and it lists off like what the minimum requirements have to be. Maybe Vanessa, I can share that with you after the call and you can send it out. But I definitely think take a look at that, and obviously talking to experts for sure.
Yep. Great. Can I purchase coverage for my building if I'm a landlord with a cannabis tenant? So I guess on the landlord side.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But keep in mind that price might increase. So versus a typical property insurance. So we have seen cases where the business, when they're renting, the rent might go up just because of this. So.
Is there a master list for retailers that can outline the best way to secure inventory to be covered by insurance?
That was kind of going back to that, like cannabis, like safeguards. And I would say too, it depends on like some carriers, like there's like a lot of universal standards, like type of safe, how you store your product, but there's some variation. So definitely taking a look at the fine print when you get quotes. But I think just taking a look at a specimen policy would be really helpful for a lot of the, prospective retailers here.
Yep. Sure. All right, we'll move on to the cultivation section. As a cultivator, what types of insurance products should you obtain? Aside from the regular stuff that we just talked about, as far as the commercial general liability and things like that, any other specific ones, like crop insurance and things like that, but any other?
Crop insurance is probably the most important one. It's a specifically designed insurance policy for this particular use case. If you think about where your working capital is allocated, is in these plants that will provide value at a later point in time. And if those crops go bad, then you lose a chunk of working capital. So that's the main one, other than the usual ones, all the other ones that apply for any business.
Well, crop insurance is actually pretty tough. If you look across the approved cultivator list for New York, it's mostly outdoor grow. And if you look into the exclusionary language for most policies, it's going to exclude your outdoor grows. So you have to look at that and see if what you're paying is actually going to be worth, that potential risk that may come due to you. And there is a certain point after it's harvested, after you're drying it, where it might make some sense to actually add that. But a lot of the outdoor grows are not going to be able to obtain crop insurance.
I wanted to say too, like there is a big difference, like going back to Ken's point, between living crop and finished stock. Like you can get coverage for finished stock, but like outdoor live crop, there's some things, but it's like called a parametric, where you can get like in Michigan, maybe I want to just get frost coverage for my crop, like just one-off risk. But even so, that's really challenging, and just understanding what you're paying for and where it triggers and where it doesn't. But just knowing that, finished stock versus like actual crops are very different from a rating basis.
And
The
what
other thing to think
exactly
of-
does it cover, I guess? So like, does it cover mold and infestation of crops? And you're saying it's excluding outdoor, what about indoor? I guess.
Indoor, yes.
Yeah.
Indoor, like absolutely. Just depending on the framework too, because sometimes, you know, technically if it's a greenhouse with PVC pipes, some people, you know, could classify that as indoor. It honestly just depends on the actual structure that it's grown in.
Yeah. Derek, did you have something to add? I'm sorry. I think
No, I just to reiterate what Eric was saying, that, I mean, I know cannabis isn't federally legal yet, but if you look at other crops across the country, there are crops that are deemed uninsurable in certain climates.
Mhm.
And cannabis outdoors in New York, not that it's uninsurable, but finding an option to do it is very, very difficult. So just something to keep in the back of everybody's mind.
All right. Can I cover my products if there is a recall?
If you have product recall,
Okay.
a lot of times carriers will offer it as like a small sublimit. But it also just depends on the triggers, right? So some of it's like only government mandated recalls versus voluntary recall. You can get standalone product recall, but I would recommend like adding it as a sublimit, you know, to start off. Like, you know, I would say companies that get standalone product recall have like large manufacturing capacity. A lot of policies you can get like a $250,000 sublimit, you know, for very minimal cost for product recall.
Yeah, the cost part of it is a big deal because you talk about those large manufacturing operations. If you're a small cannabis cultivator in New York, you're not going to be able to afford those premiums. So it's better to have something than nothing at all, which is what
Your testing standards and you meeting the standards that have been put in place should help mitigate this risk a little bit.
Yep.
I think the rest of the questions we've kind of covered already. Transit, which is cargo insurance, and liability for own vehicle, the same kind of deal, I guess, with the auto insurance. So let's move on to a processor. As a processor, what type of insurance do you obtain to cover the following: lab equipment failure, stored material spoilage, workplace negligence?
Labs are interesting where, you know, there's like a specific policy form where it could be like a general liability and like errors and omissions type policy, which kind of goes to that like equipment failure. And if product is tested improperly and someone has to burn their entire stock, right? And it was, you know, more of an error or omission, like a true like professional exposure. But at the end of the day, you know, I think we're seeing a common theme that it's very similar products across the board. It's general liability, product liability, property insurance. It's just the applications of it are very different. But the products are the same. It's just that it's different for, you know, general liability for a cultivator is just different than a dispensary. And so it's just important to make those distinctions. But a lot of the like workplace negligence is, you know, workers' compensation. You know, it's just the application is slightly different depending on the operations, but a lot of the products are the same.
All right. On-site consumption. Social consumption is an emerging license in various states, including New York State, with especially New York State and retail and social consumption option. As you may know, in the regulations, social consumption can be adjoining a retail space. So a retail can include that with, I guess, an application to the OCM for a social consumption lounge adjoining a retail dispensary. Are there insurance options for social consumption businesses yet?
Yeah, so we have seen cannabis consumption liability products. Keep in mind, though, that this is very, very, very new across the United States. So there is very little precedent to understand the overall risks that people are exposed with this. The analogy that people should keep in mind is liquor liability insurance. When you go to a bar, you get drunk, you drive out, and you crash, and somebody might sue you because you serve too much alcohol to that particular person. That's the type of risk that we're talking about here, or potential injuries that persons might have when they consume mind-altering products. So in cannabis, this is very, 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 very new. There's very few states that have this provision. So in that similar spirit, insurance products are just figuring out how to cover this type of risk.
And it'll be a long, long process as we try to figure out how to do it. Because you could look at, like what Mal's talking about with liquor liability, each state has their own laws and how it responds and who's held liable. And there's just a lot of unknown. So ensuring that risk with there being so much known tends to be difficult. So it'll be, I'm sure there'll be more options over the next few years, but it's still going to be hard to come by.
What's going to be very important is going to be, analogous to bartender training is going to be bud tender training. Is you have to make sure that your employees know how to identify someone who is, maybe had a little bit too much, and being able to cut them off and not kind of push the limits there. That's going to be important.
Yeah. So obviously, in the beginning, if that's something that starts happening this year, it may be that there might not be a specific product that's available in New York State as of this year. Possibly it kind of sounds like that, where people are still trying to figure it out. All right.
There'll be coverage available. It's more just like how there's just not a lot of claims data is kind of where the unknown is a little bit more so.
Mm-hmm. All right. So before we move into the open Q&A, I just wanted to take some time. If there's anything else that you think that the viewers should know about in general insurance, I would love for you guys to share that. Anything else that we didn't cover, or anything that to note and to highlight?
Yeah, I see a comment here by Wayne Margulies here on the Q&A that I think is an interesting one about certificates of insurance from suppliers, contractors. So when you are in a business and you are interacting with other businesses to provide your goods, it's good to know how insured those businesses are. And sometimes, there was a question that we jumped on the retailer side, I think, whether you should insure subcontractors and you have to verify that they are insured, because if they're not insured, you might be exposed. So I think it's really important for you to ask for those certificates of insurance for those partners that you might be working with.
That extends to workers' compensation too, when you're using independent contractors. So if you don't, because I've had a lot of conversations with cultivators, like I don't qualify for workers' compensation yet because I use independent contractors, and that can be true. But if you don't have a certificate of insurance where they have coverage elsewhere, and you're, let's say you have payroll in place, and then the workers' compensation will audit at the end to see if your payroll has changed so they can charge you applicable premium. If you don't have that, they could add that independent contractor payroll right into it, and you're going to be paying the premium for it anyway. So across the board, certificates of insurance are very important.
Mm-hmm.
I just think less about specific insurance, but just being very, very transparent. And if you think something may affect your program, reach out to your agent. Worst thing is, hey, no, we're all good here. But appreciate, we just see sometimes it's hard for us, we're not going to email our clients every single day to say, hey, how are things going? Is everything status quo? So I think, if you think, hey, this could impact my insurance program, reaching out to your agent just to make sure that everybody's on the same page constantly is really important, I think. And just being ultra transparent during the underwriting process, because what you don't want to have is, something happened or a claim and it's like, well, you didn't divulge that. So I think that's all just general rule of thumb, just being super communicative and very transparent, I think will be just really helpful overall.
Well, I would take one step back and say that what it really comes down to is proper selection of your insurance agent. This is not the type of situation where you can just go with your best friend from college or high school who just happens to be an agent. Is you have to sit everyone down and give them a good, true interview process and make sure that they understand what they're doing, understand what your goals are, and make sure that agent can meet what you want and where you're trying to get to.
If I double down on that, sorry, hopefully with this webinar, what you have seen is that cannabis insurance is tricky. So the risks that businesses are exposed are different than what many other businesses are, and also the insurance carriers are different. So yeah, I think the experts here in the panel are experts that have the right relationship, have the right knowledge about the industry, and in particular states like New York, where it's new. A lot of the local folks have never insured an insurance business before, a cannabis business before. So yeah, I think it's a really good call out, Kent. Really important one.
Yeah. What we did not, someone did ask about insurance for distributors. And I know that we didn't touch upon that, but if there's any type of specific, insurance that distributors should have, what would you guys recommend?
I think obviously the motor truck cargo insurance may be a little bit more important, transporting goods of others. But other than that, I think it's pretty standard. I mean, you guys feel free to disagree. I think it's pretty standard across the board what we're going to look at. And the key is getting together with your agent and putting together a very focused program for you and what you plan on doing.
The bigger thing too is just auto insurance, I think, is something that we didn't really touch on a lot. And there's a difference between owned auto and Mauricio kind of touched on it, hired and non-owned auto. So if the company owns the vehicles, and for distributors, a lot of times that is the case, like a large van, you want to make sure that you have coverage not only for liability, so third-party damage, another vehicle, but also physical damage, like first-party coverage, right? So if your vehicle is, totaled in an accident, you want to make sure there's indemnification for that, as well as any liability. And then hired and non-owned auto is the company does not own the vehicles, but employees use their own vehicles for commercial or company use, or you rent vehicles. Let's say you rent a U-Haul for company use, that's hired and non-owned auto. So there's those two distinctions between owned and non-owned.
The other thing with that, not necessarily an insurance coverage, but from a risk management standpoint with where the industry is right now, is there aren't a lot of owned autos because the capital isn't there for these organizations to buy their own fleet. So they're going down the higher non-owned path. So there's one dispensary open, soon to be two. They're loading up a vehicle. They're driving down to New York City. Make sure you're not in the same vehicle. Make sure you take a different path. Make sure the drop-off times are at different times. Just be smart about how you're doing it, because you're going to have a lot of product, a lot of value. Sometimes you might have cash, and you want to make sure that you're not predictable in how you're making those deliveries, and that's even if you have insurance coverage. In a lot of cases, you won't, or it won't be to the value that you're transporting because the market's not going to provide it. So just something to keep in the back of the mind.
For sure.
One interesting story from a customer that we reviewed once. They had auto insurance coverage, but they didn't read in page 20 something that there was a THC exclusion. So they thought they were protected. So here the cannabis specific product matters. You want to make sure that when that vehicle is moving and you have cannabis in the vehicle, that claims can be paid.
Yeah. Great. And one of the questions, so we do have a participant who's part of our card applicant, and they said that Dasney said that they would be aligned with Markham, I guess, insurance. Is there an advantage to using them? I guess Markham is a type of insurance, I'm assuming, because I'm not really as familiar with.
I know Markham, like the accounting agency. I don't know.
Yeah. So I guess that was one of the questions. And is there a list of insurance companies and/or brokers that work with cannabis plant touching companies in New York? So I guess we have
you got a few right here. Yeah,
we have 4 over here for sure, and we do have Wayne who's on doing some of the Q&A over here. He is part of Hub International, I believe. So I know that they do focus on cannabis as well.
I would also say to that is let Canny be a good resource. I mean, there are agencies like the ones on here that are members of Canny, and there's a lot of noise. I mean, you talk to those across the industry, they're getting phone calls from everybody, insurance agencies across the board, and do more than just a simple Google search. Get a referral, talk to somebody who's in the business, and do your homework before you decide to hire an agency.
For sure.
And start early.
Start early.
That means that everyone has to start talking to the insurance brokers now. That means I'm gonna call everybody now after this. But yeah, I think
is everybody on the panel like already licensed provider? Like, or in the licensing phase? Because something that we like done for a pre-licensing phase is like issue letters of intent for people that are going through the process. Like even in that, you know, we just say, hey, look, upon being awarded a valid license in XYZ state, we attest that we'll be able to get insurance. And like, you know, as Mauricio said, like starting those conversations earlier so that when you do get awarded a license and you're ready to move in, it's okay, click a button, execute versus scrambling, because that's just where mistakes are made and things are done too quickly.
We've done that for the safety group with the card awardees because there's regulations around needing to have it in place 30 days prior to opening. And then there's some gray area with deliveries and whatnot. So yes, it's a very valuable tool and it can help keep things organized.
Yeah, and just keep that in mind for anybody who is applying for the general regs when they do come out for at least retail. You know, securing your LOI right now and working, you know, and getting as much commitments as you can shows that you're prepared, shows that you are thinking about all the different, you know, facets of opening a dispensary or retail dispensary in particular, even for distributors and for, because we're not even at that stage yet, securing these and talking to them earlier on now that we're waiting, I think is a good time to have those conversations and securing those things and, you know, making a decision about it, because it'll show the regulators and the OCM that you're prepared for sure. So I agree. But anyway, we're almost coming to a close, guys. If that, I appreciate your time, everybody. And one more, let's say, here we go. So this is, I'm just putting up some of the contact information for, you know, the various panelists on here. So if you have specific questions and wanted to reach out to them, you can, you know, speak to them directly and email them directly. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And also this webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel so that you can refer back to it later on if you missed it or you wanted to share it later on. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.